Welcome, everyone. We're also grooving to the music, so have to get kind of back in our bodies again, or in our still bodies. Anyway, so excited to have you all here today and to celebrate the publication of Michael Melcher's latest book. This is the reason we're doing this particular conversation. And I'm so excited to be doing it with this particular group of people. So we've asked you to introduce yourself in the chat. So tell us where you are and what brought you here today. And I'm just going to take a moment to set the stage and introduce the people you're going to be hearing from. And Duncan, my colleague from CoGenerate, already hid himself, but he's back here. Duncan makes all the magic happen in many of our virtual events, and he just came back from vacation and was right here ready with us to kick this off. So he may turn off his screen, but he's very much with us the entire time and has always been influenced every part of the design of this thing. So I'm gonna give you a little overview of what we're gonna do today. We're going to have this talk about networking with a very specific focus, which is why should our networks, our personal networks, our professional networks be intentionally age diverse? And how can we think about the relationships in our lives with intentionality to having the kind of success and satisfaction we want to have in our lives, and to also affect the kind of social change we want to have in the world. So we'll be talking about networks and relationships, both from an individual perspective and in terms of the groups and communities and networks we create. And the people we have here today are going to dance between those various ways of thinking about relationships and networks. So I'm going to introduce you now to our little panel. And I'll start with Michael, whose book is the reason for this event. I've known Michael, I think, about 20 years, and we were having a little behind the scenes conversation before this started about this principle that Michael told me about ages ago, which we think came from a Malcolm Gladwell book, which is that there's this exercise you can do when you think about kind of who are the 5 most important people that have made things happen for you in your life. Meaning they've introduced you to key people, to key opportunities. They've kind of shown up at all the right times. And Michael is one of those people in my life. Michael has an amazing career trajectory, which you can read about in the back of the book, but I'll just tell you a few highlights of things that I find kind of special about Michael. Michael has had this career that has taken him to a lot of different settings. He's gone to public schools as well as elite schools. He's danced between many cultures, born of a Mexican-American mother, has lived in many parts of the world, speaks at least 3 or 4 languages that I know of, has worked in the foreign service in a mix of kind of government, nonprofit, startups, private sector, lots of range of places to play in. And along the way, he's been writing and thought leadering in all the interesting ways, including having written a novel when he was an undergrad in college with 2 other authors under a pseudonym, lots of really interesting pieces of Michael's life. But in terms of this book, Michael's inhabiting his role as a coach, and a coach to all kinds of diverse people, from first-gen students to CEOs and change makers and nonprofit leaders. And I've been learning from Michael for quite a long time. So I'll pause there on Michael, and then I'll move below me in the Zoom room to Charlotte Japp, who I met as the founder of CIRKEL. That's spelled CIRKEL. And Charlotte wears a couple of professional hats. She also holds platform and community for the venture firm FF Venture Capital. So she is one of those founder slash kind of community builder in multiple spaces. I met Charlotte at a networking event CoGenerate held when we were called Encore. So, we used to hold these happy hours at our WeWork back when we had an office and back when we had a WeWork. And Charlotte came along with someone else who knew us in our community. And she was kind of a young person interested in the aging and midlife and intergenerational space. And we immediately connected and started making things happen for each other, but also started realizing that we each needed what the other had. We had a big age gap between us, and we're really curious about what each other had to offer in this particular space. And I watched Charlotte grow CIRKEL. I've been a member of CIRKEL, which you're going to hear more about for many, many years. Charlotte has now recently participated in one of our innovation fellowships. And so she's going to bring a lot of intergenerational wisdom to the table here. And then finally, Lester Strong, who I can introduce in so many ways. Lester has been part of the Civic Ventures Encore CoGen community almost since the beginning, I think. I was going back with Lester to think about the panels we were on together when I first joined this organization. And I used to always bring in Lester to talk about his Encore transitions, many of them, because Lester also has had a very long and varied career starting, if you're from the Boston area, you may recognize Lester from television, where he began his career as a TV anchor. He then transitioned to the nonprofit sector, where he led a global yoga and meditation organization. That spiritual part of Lester's life has undergirded almost everything he's done ever since. He then became very connected to our work through his work leading Experience Corps, a program created by our organization and then eventually adopted by AARP, where Lester ran the show for many, many years. He served on the board of Encore. And most recently, Lester's created a couple of ventures related to the Elder Odyssey, and with an emphasis on men and aging and spirituality and aging. He's been very involved in the Union Theological Encore Transition Program. And he has a new startup venture called Peaceful Guardians that you're also going to learn about. So very robust panel we have, and I'm just going to kick in with an opening question for everyone. And I'd like Michael to kick it off. And by the way, all of you, we're going to reserve probably 10 minutes at the end for Q&A. But if you put questions into the chat, I'll be monitoring and we will weave them in as we go along as well. So I'm going to start with you, Michael. I just want to hear, like, why this book? Mm-hmm. And also, when you wrote this book, kind of, did you learn anything about yourself that was new from writing this book?
Yes. So about 70% of what I've done as an executive coach for the past 20 years relates in some ways to relationship building or communications. So I knew that was important for people. They're topics that people have heard about a lot and they kind of know about it, but aren't sure exactly what to do and when. I had two additional motivations for writing this book. I've always been very interested in the question of what you do when you're first. You might be first generation, you might be first to go to the big city, you could be the first to go to business school, the first to work in nonprofit. But either way, you are making a lot of decisions of long-term consequence without a lot of information. And often no one from your family or community of origin can really tell you what to do. So I was motivated to write some type of guide for that. And then secondarily, I was interested in what happens at different points in your life as you mature and grow older, because you have the planting tree issue, like, oh, I'm 45, I'm 50, I'm whatever age. Why didn't I do all this networking relationship building before? I kind of missed the boat. What can I do? And I wanted to give ways that can help people do that now, to kind of take advantage of what may be a bit dormant around them, but bring it to life. And about myself, I've learned that I'm more of a perfectionist than I think I am. I don't think I'm a perfectionist, but I can see it popping up everywhere, preventing me from or holding myself back, which of course is something I talk about in the book, how not to let yourself hold yourself back.
Thanks, Michael. Charlotte, I feel like to ground us in who you are and the unique parts that you bring to this conversation, I'd love you to tell the origin story of the startup you founded, CIRKEL.
Yeah, of course. Hi, everyone. So good to be here and see you. I grew up in New York, but it is a bit of a migrant story in that my parents and I actually moved over when I was really young from Paris when I was 2. And my dad was British, my mom is German. And so when we moved here, we didn't have any family in the US. And so we stayed very close knit. And as I grew older, and I actually ended up spending 4 years post college living with my parents, thankfully not paying rent, that we continued to stay close even as I became an adult and we became, roommates, so to speak. So I got a very up close view of midlife through their experience, especially when it came to work and careers. And in both cases, they experienced ageism that prevented them from staying in long-term jobs. And I was getting a front row view of the struggle to transition into what's next. And at the time I was working at Vice Media, which is a self-proclaimed youth media company. And everyone I worked with was in their 20s, maybe 30s if they were our boss or managers. Mm-hmm. And it felt like two sides that were really like missing out. You had the young people I was working with who were super lost, looking for mentors. And then my parents, were self-employed when they had to figure out what's next and started their own businesses, but they were lacking a lot of skills and updates, just being so siloed. So I saw an opportunity to create a channel that I didn't see existing at the time, and not just like a traditional mentoring channel where someone older mentors someone younger, but actually I was more excited about the reverse and saying, both sides have equal things to contribute to the other, but let's create that pathway to connect them. So that's what CIRKEL was born out of. We turned eventually into a membership community, but we started out as an events serial networking event in New York. And that was the most basic form of connecting two sides of the age spectrum. And now we continue to make matches between people aged, 20 to 70 plus. And it's been an amazing journey to make those connections between people who probably wouldn't have met if it weren't for CIRKEL.
Yeah. I have to just say that I'm a customer of CIRKEL's, a member of the CIRKEL community. And I really look forward to my CIRKEL matches. I'm now on like quarterly matching, and every time I get a little intro in my inbox, I meet a new person that I would never encounter. I've requested younger people for now, but you can request younger or older, depending on what you're craving at that moment. I may switch it up at some point. And I do encounter people I would never have encountered in other parts of my life. And the matching is so personalized. You say the kinds of things you want to learn about or the things you want to offer to others. So I am a kind of a bit of an evangelist for that model, whether you do it through CIRKEL or you have this other ways of getting this in your life. It's a very interesting way to keep yourself meeting people you wouldn't be meeting normally. Lester.
Hi, Alexa. All right. Alexa, a member raising her hand there. Hi.
I love it. Okay, Lester, you're immersed. There's many things you do, but I want to kind of dig into the fact that you're immersed. You've been immersed in the last period of your life in a lot of work holding space for people who are navigating like what you call the elder odyssey. And a lot of that work happening with men who don't often communicate and talk in those kinds of ways and in groups, but often with a spiritual lens to it. And I'd like to hear from you some observations of like, why do we need some spaces that are actually with our age peers? Because you've been holding some of those spaces. Oh, Lester, you're on mute.
How's that? Got me now? Yeah. Great. Elder Odyssey is really an outgrowth of kind of my own journey, and a colleague of mine whom you know, Marci, very well, Ev Mann, And the recognition was that this stage of life, a lot of people just simply were not prepared for. Their life was so much in the doing and in the creating of careers that once we begin to get into that third stage of life, which is now, of course, longer than it was for our parents, how do you really begin to find real meaning and real joy in that? So it really is about really kind of deconstructing in some ways kind of your perceptions and your ideas of who and what you are, and then rebuilding it from kind of the fundamental sense of what are those things that you value most in your life, and how can you begin to cultivate them really in a really important and meaningful way. So the reason why it's really valuable, I won't say critical, but I would say valuable to work with a specific cohort, age cohort, is because they're all going through it. They've all kind of had this life's journey, so that now they're saying, let's figure this out together. Let's figure out. And what's also beautiful about it in the way we've designed it is that everybody is one another's teacher. It's not that we're kind of pouring out some kind of mystical knowledge. It's about, based on our own life experience, what is it that we've learned that really can be of use and of value, not only to me, but to all of these other people. And it's that kind of sharing that really creates, in my experience, a wonderful, beautiful, vibrant community that we have one now that's been going on in the Hudson Valley for the past 5 years. And it's been wonderful.
Wow. So, stepping on this kind of age peers, I think we're used to being around our age peers, right? It happens in school. It happens like at inflection points of our professional lives. So I do want to shift into like why, and Michael, like I know you've thought about this a lot with the book. Why is it important to have this balance of people in your kind of age peer group as well as people across the difference of age?
People in your age peer group can be supportive, they can be helpful, there can be easy understanding, but being only your peer group can also be extremely limiting. There's this idea in the research called the strength of weak ties that was created by a grad student in the 70s named Mark Granovetter. And what it basically means is that in your overall network, people that you don't know very well can be much more helpful to you than people you know quite well when it comes to certain types of transitions. And it's the reasoning under that is relevant here. So there were two reasons. One, weak ties have different information from you. So if you've just graduated with an MBA, all the other people who graduate with that program have pretty much the same worldview and are looking at the same types of things. And you could apply that to any other stage of life. The real knowledge is people outside of that, because they just have a different reality. And so when you have a conversation, you're getting fresh information that you wouldn't likely have. So that directly applies to a multi-generational cohort. The second thing is that your strong ties, people you have ongoing exchange with, can be vested in a certain idea of who you are and what you're good at. They may have loving doubts. They may not want you to change. Whereas people you don't know that well tend to be quite open because they don't have that investment. So both of these are reasons to stretch outside of the group that seems most comfortable. We can have a limiting frame without being aware of it.
Well, I mean, I think that gets to something I just wanted to follow up on. Sometimes kind of forming relationships with people much older or much younger than us, or even slightly older or younger than us, can feel uncomfortable. I mean, there is this sense that there's power dynamics sometimes that can influence that, often felt, and sometimes the older people have more power, sometimes the younger people have more power. So it all depends on the environment you're in. And sometimes you do not know how to navigate in the culture of the other age group. I see that a lot happening with older people who are just not sure how to communicate with younger people, for example, or are they going to be perceived the right way? So I'd like to ask all of you, and Charlotte, you kind of live in this day in, day out at CIRKEL. What are some ways that we can overcome that and actually build trust and comfort when we're trying to cross generations?
Yeah, I think it's super important to create an even playing field when you're making these connections, or if you're trying to reach out and build a new friendship or working relationship with someone from a different generation. With CIRKEL, we sort of think of these introductions as like a third space, like a safe, neutral space. So it's not home where you have, these are like the total opposite of a weak tie, the strongest ties, people who've known you your whole life. And then you have work, which is full of power dynamics, where sure, you might have a boss who wants you to be successful, but there's all that baggage, like this person is evaluating you, they're controlling perhaps your salary decisions, compensation, all of this. And so you want to find like that safe third space where there is no power dynamic. And I think you have to walk into it the right way to make sure that there's no power dynamic. And so for us, we really thought about designing the experience so that when members are onboarded and they might be kind of nervous to join this kind of community, we wanted to make sure that we wrote their bio instead of that person writing their own bio. And the thinking was, kind of like when Marci introduced us, she did a way better job than if we were to introduce ourselves. Like she can prop us up and she knows how to let us shine in a way that we don't often let ourselves shine. So we wanted to do that with all of our members and make sure that whether you're 20 years old or 72, like all of your great accomplishments are all acknowledged and put forward, and you set the scene that this person has done so much, but they also have questions. They also have things they're trying to work on, new projects on the horizon. And that's the same for everyone regarding, regardless of their generation or age that they're coming from. So it's something to keep in mind and think about as you design opportunities to connect people across generations, but also, from your own perspective, if you're going out to coffee with someone and they're much younger than you, how can you make it clear that like you're on their level, this is safe? There are ways to make sure that you acknowledge all of their accomplishments too, so you can keep that equality there.
This is a direct link, Lesser, to something we were just talking about in prepping for this yesterday, and I'd love you to share a little. I mean, literal safety came up in the initiative you're working on now, Peaceful Guardians, connecting teens and police officers. Could you talk a little bit about how you thought through what that project is and how you specifically thought about making the two different groups feel safe in their interaction?
Well, unfortunately, in Kingston, the city in the Hudson Valley where we live, there was growing tension between the community and the police department. And so much so that they were really talking past each other. In community meetings, they simply were not connecting, so that the polarization, word that we're using far too often these days, the polarization was only increasing. So we created a program called the Peaceful Guardians Project to serve as a bridge between the community and law enforcement in the city, and specifically young people, because the young people were in many ways both the most angry and also the most fearful of the police. So we had significant trust issues, frankly, on both sides. The young people thinking that we're just one more way to placate young people and not really give them what they need. And then on the other side, the police department was saying, you're really just using us as a pawn for your political advantage. So we really had trust issues on both sides. So what we had to do was to really meet, to Charlotte's point, had to meet people where they are. And for the young people, it was really about, I'm here And I'm concerned about your welfare just as much as I'm concerned about mine.
Mhm.
Whether you want to buy into this program, you don't want to buy into this program, our core intention is to support your well-being.
Mhm.
And by the way, we did the same thing with the police as well, because there was mistrust there. So we created two, and again, Charlotte, your points are like a blueprint for what we did. We separated them out. We put them in safe spaces. There was a community center where we did the work with the middle school students, and there was the police academy where we did the work with the police officers. And we did work that really promoted their well-being. I mean, these guys have never heard of meditation before and certainly wouldn't agree to it. And the kids likewise had never, considered meditation, but we created an idea called sound surfing, which we did with a Tibetan singing bowl, and they loved it. But more importantly, what we did was we gave them a forum to really talk about what was real and important and critical for them. And then once that trust was built on both sides, then we could bring them together as equals. And that's a really important point.
Mhm.
Every person's voice in the room had value and resonance. So we really, really wanted to make sure that they felt that. And it was through that process that we've really begun to make, I think, some really important changes.
Yeah, echoing themes. Moving on to another question here. And Michael, I want to lean into your I know you've studied all the different kind of personality types and different styles. Some of us are connectors, some of us are conveners, some of us are introverted, some of us are extroverted. Can you give us some overview, and feel free to throw in the research where it exists, in how to think about different ways to cultivate relationships and build community and networks based on our own individual styles. And I think a lot of people often think they have to change and be a different kind of person to grow a network. And I know that's not your view. So give us some ways to think creatively and about this.
Right. It's helpful listening to Lester and Charlotte for me to identify what my sweet spot really is, because I think the three of you often work in creating communities of one time or another, whereas the work I've done for 20 years is very much working with the individual, like almost as an athletic coach. Here's the game. All right, let's be successful here. So it's not in the ambit of what I do to really try to change the overall system. It's more like, given what it is, how are we going to be successful? And my basic belief is that you can and should be yourself with a bit of stretching. So if you try to become another person, it's not going to be authentic. It's quite difficult to change yourself. It's probably not a winning strategy. And one reason that people feel inhibited about networking is that they kind of have this image that they need to be wearing a plaid suit and have a wad of business cards and, chewing gum and being really confident. And that is one way you can do it. So I'd start by saying that there are many different ways to build relationships. You could go to events, you could participate in things like this. You can write to people, you can call people, you can see people one-on-one, you can see people virtually. There's just a whole range of things. And so, and none of them is necessarily the thing you have to do. And most people in the professional world don't really do that good of a job building relationships. So if you even try and do a few things, you're already going to be lifted up to the top 20 or 30th percentile just by doing that. In terms of different personality types, there is this belief that many people have that this is harder for introverts, or that introverts are less successful than others. So just a definitional thing, introverts get their energy from themselves and extroverts get their energy from the outside world or from interaction. And it is true that people who identify as introverted will tend to feel a little bit of a tax when they reach out or talk to people. There's kind of a limited amount of fuel in the tank for that, and then they'll need to just recover in some way. but it's not that they are less social. And what I've also found, though, is that introverts are often more successful in certain types of interactions because they'll be more deliberate, more planful. They'll think ahead of time, what am I trying to do? What are my messages? Because I know I'm not just going to wing it. Whereas extroverts like me are accustomed to building rapport and, meeting people first thing and enjoying it. And we can wing it a bit too much, right? So I just think there's a wide range of ways to be effective, and defining the most extreme way and then thinking that's not us is actually a way to keep us too safe, because then you don't have to do anything. You're like, well, I hate conventions, so I can't do any of this relationship building. And it's a little bit convenient because then you don't actually have to do anything at all.
Yeah. Charlotte, I'm thinking you've seen so many of these matches through CIRKEL, and I know that some really strong bonds have emerged. And I'm sure sometimes there's nothing that happens after an initial conversation. When you see these bonds emerging, and when you kind of, in the years that you've done this, I think you've also gotten probably more smarter about how you make matches. What do you think is kind of the secret sauce to connections that endure versus those that fizzle?
Yeah, I think there are 3 key elements, and we built an algorithm that helps us with matching, and it was designed based off of what we were doing manually and what we were sort of like rejiggering and optimizing for before this algorithm came about. So I guess the first piece is a personal overlap. So some kind of connection that they both had in common, and it could be a good foundation for conversation. And that could be as light or as intense as you want. Sometimes, with a member or 2 members that we knew were open to this kind of depth, we've matched 2 women who've gone through divorce, one in her 20s, one in her 60s. And that was a really powerful starting ground, even though the conversation was professionally oriented. It was a really beautiful first piece to just like get to know each other, build the trust, and then go deep into those more tactical things they wanted to explore. So that's the first piece, that personal connection. And again, this could be as simple as you both started in advertising and moved on into other careers. Like it could be not so in depth as the divorce piece. And then the other 2 are finding a sort of an ask or a question or a challenge that the older person is working on and that the younger person has some experience in. And then the third one is the opposite. So what is something that the younger person is well-versed in? Or I guess I have that the other way around. What's a challenge that the younger person has that this older individual is experienced in and is very eager to be helpful? And so that's like the basic structure. And I think, again, it ladders up to the even playing field and that everyone is here to learn. Sometimes we've actually gotten potential members who've applied and been very clear that they thought they didn't have anything to learn because they were already a CEO. They've had a really illustrious career. Why should I be paying to be part of this membership to mentor younger people? And we'll just say, this isn't for you then, because we're looking for people who are growth mindset oriented, understand they always have something next on the horizon that they want to learn. And of course, they love to connect with people who are trying to learn that thing, but it always needs to be a 2-way street.
I want to get to one topic that I think hits all of us, which is what happens to our networks and how should we think about them when we make the inevitable transitions of life? I have watched, Michael, you become a father in the last, decade, and a huge change in how you think about relationships and networks. Lester, I'm watching you relocated to a new state in the last year. And I'm sure that's been an enormous change in how you think about your networks. Charlotte, you have your startup. Now you have a full-time job and a startup, and you run a completely separate community through your day job than through your own business. So I'd love each of you to share some perspective on how you think about networks as you go through important life or work transitions. And who wants to start?
Well, I'll jump in. I think that I'm at a stage in my life where I've gone through quite a few different stages. And what I think I've come to experience is that that I understand that relationships will strengthen or weaken through these different life circumstances, and that's okay. That's okay. I think that I have, if you will, built a level of social capital where I have this kind of bucket now of really important and wonderful relationships that I can then dip into given whatever the circumstance is. And I got to say, the reason why I can dip into that bucket is because the connections, whether professional or personal, were always genuine and always heartfelt, always real, and was always about mutual trust. And with that bond, then I was at a reunion, a 50-year reunion at my college, and there were bonds that were still there. And I've just moved, as you said, to a new state, and I'm finding new bonds and new relationships there. So it's really about being open to what may be in front of you and not come with both either preconceptions of what it should be like or judgments about how you would expect people to react to you. So it's really important that there's this level of openness, vulnerability, and really just true honesty. And my experience has been, if I can lead with that, I'm having no trouble making the transitions.
Great. Who's next?
Well, I'll follow up what Lester just said. You said transition, and a transition is a type of disruption, right? It's a disruption in your life, and it can seem like it's scary, but it's also an opportunity because a different version of you is showing up. For example, when I became a father, which I did at the age of 51, it did change my life in a lot of ways, and frankly, it gave me something different to bring to the table. And I discovered that I was having much deeper conversations with a lot of women in my life who had kids and were kind of intrigued by what I was doing. And the more I would bring up the hard parts and the frustrations, and then they'd have an opportunity to give me like some very sage advice, right? And so it just enabled both of us to be at a different kind of connection that I could not have really predicted. And some relationships kind of went away or into cold storage because it just didn't fit as much. I also, between having children and writing a book, I'm very into this idea of birth and giving birth to things. And I think one of the most powerful things you could do at any time in your life is, okay, what am I interested in giving birth to now? Because that gives you this kind of propulsive forward energy and optimism and just curiosity. I wonder what's out there, as opposed to just looking back at everything that's changed or the stuff that you don't have anymore.
Yeah.
I just want to give a quick amen to that, Michael, because that's been my experience. As you look forward and really look at new opportunities to contribute, it's very exciting.
Yeah. I want to shift a tiny bit to some of the audience questions, because I've been looking at them and there's some really good ones here, and I want to make sure we respond to what people are asking for. And the first one is, I think there have been some really interesting questions about loneliness, and about, we all know that so many of us, especially still kind of in the wake of the pandemic, maybe got out of practice of being out in the world, or our worlds have shrunk in some ways. So one person here, Adam, said this really beautiful: when we're functioning normally, when we need connection, we reach out to our social network and connect. The question is, what happens when we are unable to reach out for a variety of reasons and our loneliness becomes persistent and causes loneliness driven behavioral changes? What have the panelists found effective in transitioning away from our loneliness behaviors and back towards our normal presence? So I guess it's like, how do we set ourselves up to be more seeking of relationships when we have that urge to retreat because it feels like the safe thing to do?
Marci, I can jump in. My book is a lot about discomfort, actually. It's about this discomfort that is built into the system. And fundamentally, it's because you are activating yourself to get something different from what you would just get by existing. And you are reaching out to people who are not already reaching out to you. And so a big part of it is just, how do you not fight the discomfort, just sort of accept it as part of the process and not be too much in awe of it. And I think there's an analogy here, which is that the way you feel before you try to build a connection is different from the way that you'll feel as you are talking to somebody. It's kind of like if I were to go to the gym. I never want to go to the gym, but once I'm there, I kind of like it. And then I'm proud of myself for having done it. So like the way you feel, it's not so much ignore your feelings, but the way you feel at the beginning is not how you feel later on. And the other thing is that there is like an investment aspect to building relationships. So you won't necessarily get the response you want right away. You may have to go multiple times, but then you actually start becoming part of a community. I discovered this as a parent, like I'm a single parent, and generally as a father, you are just not wired in to the parent network, which is primarily mom oriented. It's not exactly excluding, but they're not quite sure what to do with you. But I learned that just consistently showing up at events, and then all of a sudden, a few months or a year later, I'm part of the group through a process I didn't even know was happening. So it does pay off, but it requires a little bit of fortitude to just keep on going to the church meeting or keep going to the meetings, and maybe talk to one person each time, and gradually it builds into something.
Yeah. There are more questions, but Lester, it looks like you wanted
just a little bit. I would, building on Michael's point, I would recommend what I recommended to my son, who's in his 30s, and that is serve someone else other than yourself. Volunteer, get on a phone link, do something, because when you make this focus all about you, you really begin to think it only magnifies what you're feeling. Also, it suggests that you feel like you have no agency. You want people to act on you rather than you taking the initiative. And again, it may be uncomfortable, but that's how you crack through that loneliness, is to give of yourself to others.
I want to lean in. I want to share one of my favorite quotes of all time, the Margaret Mead quote: "Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it is the only thing that ever has." You have all been part of creating groups and or being parts of groups that are trying to do positive social change work. And I'd just like to hear a little bit of what's your take on how relationship dynamics work in groups. I mean, Charlotte, I want to start with you because I think you talk about CIRKEL as something for the individual, but you've also used CIRKEL as a platform to talk about the systemic change that needs to happen around ageism and around, aging, power, all of that. So can you kick us off with your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I was just, listening also to what Lester was saying about birth, and I think even what Michael wrote in the book about, going out to a networking event with something in mind that you want to ask for or put out there. I think with CIRKEL, it was my way of waving a flag and saying, I really care about connecting generations. I really don't think that careers should have an expiration date. And even though none of my strong tie network friends really had the same passions, it was really cool to find all of these new people that were really attracted to that cause and that mindset, that we should all be, crossing the generational bridge and doing things together and benefiting from each other's knowledge. And so I think, also with that kind of nod to how you get rid of the feeling of loneliness, like sometimes you have to get out there, put yourself out there and say, like, I believe in this thing. And then you suddenly look around, there's a community of people who are standing by you and you didn't know them before, but you all are drawn together by this belief or vision of a better world.
Michael or Lester, do you want to add to that?
That was great.
Yeah, just to add on to what Charlotte just said, we all know the phrase consciousness raising, right? And my recollection of it was reading The Feminine Mystique by Betty Friedan and the kind of consciousness raising of women in the 1950s, like wiring the situation. But I think what Charlotte and Les are talking about is this consciousness raising that can occur in a multi-generational group, like a group that might not seem to have a lot in common, but on some level you actually do share values and ambitions. And it's kind of, it reminds me when you go to if you go to a foreign country and you're talking to somebody, you're barely communicating, but then you're able to kind of share a joke or exchange family photos or kind of discover you like the same thing. And you just get this kind of light in your eyes at building that unexpected connection. And so I think the beauty of the work you're all doing is that that all these like little jewels are out there somewhere, but they're kind of hidden in the underbrush and under rocks and this and that. But with the little searching, we can find them.
I want to go to a bit of a harder question in a way, in that several people have asked a variation of a question about how to solve some tensions they're feeling around cross-generational relationships. And Priya framed this really beautiful. It's a little long, but I want to read it because I love the way she asked. I have a question regarding culture building in an intergenerational workspace. This organization is half millennials and half boomers or later Gen X folks. There can be a power differential sometimes in the folks who have more senior roles are an older generation and have a little less capacity for compromise. The younger folks often don't hold these senior roles and yet are invested in commonality and compromise. I'm seeing older folks experience new ways of doing things or codifying current ways of doing things as challenging. How can we create a positive culture across generations that is welcoming to new ideas and ways of doing things, as well as honoring current practice and the work that has come before us? And I want to marry that with a question from Steph, which is about what are some of the do's and don'ts or minefields of cross-generational relationship building? So what's coming up for each of you? I see Charlotte nodding a lot. You've given this idea a lot of thought, I know.
Yes. It's interesting because I work at a VC that is very multi-generational. And I guess our age range is like 23 to 63. Obviously, or not, I shouldn't say obviously, that was bad, but the 63-year-old is the founder of the company. And I notice he doesn't realize this, but I really wish I could pull him aside and tell him to listen more and to create more space for the 23-year-old and the 26-year-old to share what's on their mind, like totally judgment-free, no repercussions. And I don't think this is on purpose, and it's not any ill will, but it's something I've seen come up a lot. And so I'll leave it with, we have 2 ears and 1 mouth. So you should be listening twice as much as you're speaking for everyone. But I think as we get older, maybe, we have more to say. Maybe.
I'd love to build on that. And, my approach has been what I call defenselessness. In other words, the goal is to not defend my position. It is really to figure out what is the best solution and really go with that. And to Charlotte's point, what that requires is extremely careful listening to find what is the best solution. And then how empowering it is. I've seen it multiple times when you say, boy, that's the best idea. You may have come with an idea, but this is the one that's really going to take us farthest. And so it's really, again, it's just about creating an even playing field where everybody's voice really has merit and resonance. And then because we're looking at the objective to say which one is going to get us there.
Yeah. So we're getting close to the end here. I think I'm going to look for another question from the audience. And this one I think is something I have an answer to, but I want to hear others. I have to look back to who asked this. Kathleen, I think, said she was really seeking ideas for how to meet younger people. She is in her 70s. And I think I'm going to go back to the volunteering suggestion from Lester. I was actually craving younger people in my life when I was kind of mid-career in New York, feeling like I don't have any kids, and that's actually really driven my quest for intergenerational relationships. And I was like, how am I going to meet younger people in my city if I don't have kids? Like when you have a kid, it's like you have a dog. You meet other people like in this circumstance. So I sought something, a volunteer experience that would match my own interests. And I joined this intergenerational writing community called Girls Right Now. It's a mentoring community that's multi-generational. And I got really involved in this organization. I was a mentor. I served on the board. I became an advisor. And through it, I know early on, I had relationships where I was definitely in the mentor to someone's mentee, but very quickly, I started learning so much and had that mutuality that Charlotte talked about with these younger women that I was meeting through Girls Right Now, many of whom have become deep friends, professional contacts, even extended family kinds of relationships. So I say, do that volunteering and try to do it in a way that really hews to your interests and things you want to be doing anyway. It also enhanced my community as a writer greatly to be part of that community and see the trends that were coming down the pike and meet the emerging voices. So anybody else have a suggestion?
Well, I think it's always good to lead with your interests rather than your background. So you could make a list of a few issues or just hobbies or things that are interesting to you. And then I would stress test it by asking to some younger person you know, saying, which of these are things that younger people are interested in? And if they are, where would they express that? So that you at least have a way to think about joining some existing cause or community or what have you, with a pretty good chance that there will be young people there.
So I want to do a little closing that's going to leave people with something they can try when they leave this space. So we're going to do like a try this at home round robin. And I want to hear what you suggest people do when they leave this session. Who would like to kick us off?
I'll jump in with something.
Okay.
In my book, I talk about this thing called a ping. So a ping is a message that you send to somebody, to a strong tie or weak tie, that does not require a response. And either saying, hey, was thinking about you today, hope you're well, or hey, I passed by your favorite coffee shop, hope you're doing well. Or you may want to share along a resource. Oh, I just attended this cool webinar, had some good ideas. Here's a link in case you'd like it. Hope all is well. Because that is a great way to take the pressure off you, because you're not really asking them for anything, and it's often a little treat for somebody else. They may respond, they may not, but you've shown that you care about them, and you have not given them like an assignment of something to do.
Love that. It relates to, I was just listening to Vivek Murthy, the Surgeon General, who was interviewed by Krista Tippett on the On Being podcast. And he talked about the power of a 15-minute connection every day with someone in your life, just by phone or in person, and just that how that small amount of connection can really influence our well-being. So the ping is even smaller than that. It can be. Charlotte, what do you got?
Yeah, I did this actually in the early days of starting CIRKEL, and I challenge you to challenge yourself maybe for a month, where each week you choose one thing that you want to learn more about, and you choose a week tie to go and ask some questions about it. And, bonus points if this person is not in your generation or age group, and you'll finish the month feeling like, wow, I learned a lot. And kind of to Michael's point, like I found a really easy way to make a connection or revisit a connection in a genuine way. And then, of course, never finish that call without saying, is there anything that I could help you with?
Lester.
Well, I think we're all circling around the same thing. I think that it's really, my experience is that when I engage with someone and I think about what can I give you rather than what can I get from you? How can I be here with you in this moment and really just offer something, whether it's a listening ear, whether it's a nod, whether it's a laugh, whether it's a suggestion, anything, but it's not, again, it comes back to the point that it's not about you. It's about you giving to someone else. And it could be the smallest thing. It could be holding the door for somebody. But there's something that happens inside of us, some alchemy, when we go outside of ourselves and really extend ourselves to someone else. So that's something that I would suggest, regardless of age.
Thank you. I love all these try this at homes. I'm going to go and do them all. Many people have asked in the comments if we'll share all the great links from this webinar, details about Michael's book, about CIRKEL, all the resources that have come up in the conversation, and we will. Duncan may want to put himself back on the video if he likes, because Duncan is the person who's been tracking all of that, and we'll make sure you all get it after this webinar. We'll also send out a recording so you can rewatch it or share with others. But I do appreciate all of you joining us today, and I really appreciate the panelists and all the wisdom you dropped. So thanks all, and go out and form relationships that are going to change you and change the world.